Welcome, everybody, to this week's version of the Keegan and Karen Show, otherwise known as our weekly podcast. So thank you for joining us. My name is Pastor Keegan Brown. I'm from Bates and Trinity, down on the southern half of the cooperative parish of the Ocean Pines and Snow Hill parish here for the United Methodist Church. And I'm joined, just like I am every week, by Pastor Karen Sadberry, who's the associate pastor up at Community. And we're having a chat this week about someone that matches her in a weird way, and that is Sarah, a person who doesn't do well with waiting. And Karen keeps waiting to retire, and here she is just hanging around with us. She just can't let it go. So welcome back this week, Karen. Happy to have
Good
you.
to be here.
So this week we were talking about Sarah, like I just said, and Sarah had a very complex story, but we're only going to tuck into one piece of her very complex story, and that is when God himself told her she was going to have a child and her reaction to it. So there's two halves to this. It's God coming and then God talking and her reaction. And I'm going to go ahead and start by reading the first half of Genesis 18, 1 through 8. And then when we get to the second half of the podcast, Karen will take 9 through 15. So I'll go ahead and get started. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, and he sat at the entrance of his tent at the heat of the day. He looked up, and he saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. And he said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you've come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abram hastened to the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." And Abram ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. And then he took curds and milk, and the calf that he prepared, and set it before them. And they stood by them under the tree while they ate. So that's where we're going to stop today. And it seems like a really weird place to stop. But there's a couple of things in there that, Karen and I we just really wanted to tuck into, as to one, the 3 men who showed up, but then also just really what this shows as to the culture of the time, because it's really important to talk about that. Because in this point in the life of Abraham and Sarah, they've moved around. Sarah's already gone through Abraham already went through this period of time where he had Sarah pretend to be his sister to go be a wife of Pharaoh. Like, they've had all this weirdness going on in their life. And then this happens, right? And it was roughly 24 years before this when they were first promised to become a great nation and have a child. So, like, it's a really interesting time in their life. Yeah.
And we shouldn't forget how they felt they had to help God out with that promise
Yes.
and have a kid their own way.
Yeah. And not through adoption either, right?
No.
Yeah. So for those who are not familiar with the story, you want to catch them up there, Karen?
Well, when it had taken longer than they thought it should, Sarah actually hatched this plan where she would give her maid to Abraham for Abraham to have a child with her. And in those days, if that happened, that child was considered the child of the couple.
Right.
But that obviously wasn't the plan that God had in mind. And so at this point, it's still pretty calm and peaceful at Abraham's household,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not going to stay that way.
It's not going to stay that way. And it's so interesting that she makes this choice and that he allows it. It's just like we were talking about last week, with Hannah. It's like, what is up with these guys who think that that's a smart choice? Like,
Right.
I don't get that. I don't
Right.
get it. So, all right. So one of the other things we were talking about was just the concept of hospitality in their
Mhm.
culture. And it was important. Like, if you were not hospitable, it was not a good sign. And if you look at what he's doing, I mean, it's some pretty significant,
Yes, it is.
like, on the fly. So I don't know many people who on the fly would go out and kill a cow.
Mm-mm. Well, even the amount of baked goods, I forget how much a seah is, but the amount of bread that Sarah was busy making was enough to feed a whole lot more than 3 men.
3 men, right? And I think it's also important to talk about that it says that there were 3 men coming. right? And it's
Mhm.
the Lord appeared. So we know one of them was the Lord. And so he's showing up with two other men, two other messengers, and in the heat of the day. And that's
Mhm.
not a normal time for
No.
people to be coming. Like in the middle of the desert, you don't go wander around in the middle of the day. They tended to lay low. That was a good nap time.
And hospitality was not just manners, it was vital to survival, 'cause
Mhm.
there wasn't a Holiday Inn or a Best Western or whatever, and you were not only supposed to provide food and water and take care of the animals, but if someone were to come and want to attack them, you were supposed to defend them with your own life.
Right.
So it was survival in a hostile environment.
A very hostile environment because even when you think about, fast forward thousands of years and you've got Jesus giving the story of the Good Samaritan, what happened?
Mhm.
Right? The guy was attacked. Like it was not uncommon. It was a very ruthless time.
Mhm.
Like today, where we take the civility of today for granted. We really do. We really, really do. I also find it interesting that if she was making cakes, this was unleavened bread. Like they're throwing this together. But
Right. Right.
right, 'cause bread takes a while to rise.
Mhm.
That's a process. You're not doing that on the fly. And they
Plus, it
didn't have
takes a while to roast a cow too.
yeah, but they didn't have packets of little Fleischmann's yeast in the grocery
True. True.
right? So where sourdough is quite the fad these days, that was how they lived.
Mhm.
You were dependent on that live culture, and that takes 24 hours, to make a loaf of bread. So, I mean, if she had some, maybe she took what she had already started for the day for other people, you know,
Mhm.
maybe they were having unleavened bread for dinner that night. I don't know.
Maybe.
There's only so much leaven to go around. So,
I think it's interesting, and my eye just fell on this, that after he gets all this food prepared and he
mhm.
takes it to the 3 men, he stood under the tree near them as they ate, whereas I would have expected him to sit and eat with them. That would seem to me hospitality. And so I just kinda wonder why he stood. Perhaps he knew that they were somebody, like, above his
Well,
level.
that's actually what it was because the Hebrew word, when it says that he was doing that, he attended to them. He pakad, Paqad. I'm not the best at pronouncing, right? So, and it was attended like you would attend like a king, like someone. So he saw them as someone higher than him who had arrived. So, and he even says it. He says, "My Lord, if I find favor with you." So, from the very moment that they come on the scene, he's recognizing what's going on, and that
Mhm.
if this isn't God himself, this is a divine visit, right? Because no one should be showing up now anyways.
Right, right.
And I would have to assume if pre-incarnate Christ showed up, I would hope that I would recognize who I'm talking to. If not, hmm, I might have to do some self-examination. So, which, you and I have talked about that's a hard conversation. In fact, like we know that it wasn't God himself, and like as God the Father, because it says you can't see him and live, right? So we know that that's not who it was. And you had made the statement that they always show up as the Trinity, which I totally
Mhm.
agree with. You know, I would like to think it's not the Holy Spirit apparating in front of him because that might be scary, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, to me, it's just a matter of deduction as to which one
Mhm.
of the Trinity is there. I would love to know who the other two are. Like, is that Gabriel and Michael? If so, man, that must have been a pretty rough bunch, right?
Right, right. Well,
So,
Paul obviously assumed. I think it was Paul who said that we can, entertain angels unaware, so
mhm,
he
right.
certainly assumed that they were angels.
Yeah. So, yeah, but if he's setting up basically a banquet for them. Like,
Mhm.
and and yet he says, "Just refresh yourself and then pass on." So he's doing all this and not even asking for a blessing, which would have been very common back then,
Right.
right? He's like, "Just let me bless you, and then you can go on about your way," which makes you wonder about his mindset at the time. I mean, he had been told by God several times that he was going to be blessed, right? It had been
Mhm.
reinforced multiple times by this point, and multiple times they had tried to find their own way to make it happen. So I do wonder if given that the multiple times it happened, did he absolutely recognize who this was? And you're like, oh, I'm not asking for no blessings because I haven't done so great with what he's already given me. Like so. Um,
He also doesn't invite them to stay.
mm-mm,
He doesn't try to
mm-mm,
detain them, like to
no,
have a conversation or get the
mm,
news from town or
mm-mm,
anything like that. So perhaps that's another sign that he recognized that this was out of the ordinary.
yeah. I think it's also a call to us as to how do we deal with the people that just show up in our life, and do we give them our best or do we just push them to the side?
Mhm. Mhm.
And he didn't push them to the side. And this is one of those times where you have that example of what it is that you're supposed to be if you're part of the body of Christ. You're supposed to be stepping up for the least of these, and this wasn't even the least of these. Like he's stepping up in a big way.
Right.
So, well, let's go to the big part of the story. Do you want to
Yeah.
go ahead and take 9 through 15?
Sure. They said to him, "Where's your wife Sarah?" And he said, "Right here in the tent." Then one of the men said, "I will definitely return to you about this time next year. Then your wife Sarah will have a son." Sarah was listening at the tent behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were both very old. Sarah was no longer menstruating. So Sarah laughed to herself, thinking, "I'm no longer able to have children, and my husband's old." The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Me give birth at my age?' Is anything too difficult for the Lord? When I return to you about this time next year, Sarah will have a son." Sarah lied and said, "I didn't laugh," because she was frightened. But he said, "No, you laughed."
Yeah. I have two things to say on that. So the first one
Mhm.
is I would like to say that this is another piece of why I believe it's a pre-incarnate Christ because he knew what was happening where he wasn't. This is no different than um, the fig tree. This is no different than all those other times when he knew what was going on where he wasn't. Right? Christ.
Mhm.
Yeah. The second thing is she's very lucky because in the New Testament, someone was told they were going to have a kid, and he ended up not talking till John the Baptist was born. I'm just putting that
Right,
out there. So she was very
right.
fortunate. She got to keep her tongue.
But I want to turn your attention to Genesis 17:17,
Okay.
where God says to Abraham
Mhm.
that, "I will bless her and even give you a son from her. I will bless her so that she will become nations and kings of people will come from her." Abraham fell on his face and laughed. He said to himself, "Can a 100-year-old man become a father, or Sarah, a 90-year-old woman, have a child?" We talk a lot of times about Sarah laughing.
Mhm.
We don't talk so much about Abraham laughing. And I mean, Sarah's chuckling behind the door. Abraham's falling on his face.
Okay. Well, all right. I'm going to come to Abram's defense for a second. At least
Okay.
he did it in God's face. He didn't hide it. And when he was called out about, when she was called out about it, she lied about it. She's like, I didn't do that. Right. When, yeah, you did. Right. He's just bold about it. Like, you want to talk about a Hebrews moment where you come boldly to the throne of grace, right? Like, he was bold. He just falls on his face and laughs. But I think in both of their cases, this is fair, right? They're looking
Mhm.
at the world through the only lens they have, right? 90 years old and you're going to have a baby. I'm sorry. 90 years old, I don't want a baby.
That's what I
I'm
was gonna say. It's not necessarily good news at this point.
no, I'm in my 40s and my wife and I talk all the time about if she was to get pregnant, we would probably cry, right? Like
Right.
we're at the other end of that path.
Mhm.
Now, they didn't have one though. Would that change your opinion? I don't think so at 90.
Uh-uh. I mean, even at 24 when they got I mean, 24 years ago when they had the promise given to them, that's not necessarily even good news at that point.
66, just to do the math for you. She was 66, right?
Uh-huh.
According to the United States government, that's retirement age, right? Because that's when you get Social
Mhm.
Security. So, like, and now you can have a kid. Like,
Yeah.
And if you think about, like, when people have kids and the kid is like, you do the math when they're an older parent, like, "Oh my gosh, you're gonna be so old, like, this age when that
Right.
kid graduates high school." Like, you're doing that math. Well, do
Right.
the math on this, you're gonna be 118. You're dead, dude. You're dead when he graduates high school. That's crazy to me. And so I
Mhm.
don't think they're that off in saying that. But
No.
but
No.
at but at least they both say what we're all thinking, like, who has a kid at 90 years old? Nobody, right? And I love that it said, "I'm not menstruating." That means she's gone through menopause, right?
Mhm.
Like, so as far as she's concerned, physically, the door is
Right.
closed. No, I love how she says that her husband is old. We now know through science that that can happen on the guy's side to the moment you die. They didn't
Right.
know back then.
Right.
Yeah, because and how would they? Because if their wives were too old, then it wasn't happening anyways, right? But
Mhm. Mhm.
but that's crazy to me. That's absolutely crazy. And
And
go ahead.
that's one of the things I love about the Old Testament is they don't clean it up. They
Mhm.
don't have Abraham fall down and say, "Oh, that's such good news."
Yeah,
And Sarah doesn't say, "Oh, I can't wait."
yeah, yeah.
They show the scripture writers show us an honest picture of
Mhm.
how they react.
Yeah.
They showed us earlier in Sarah's story her jealousy over Hagar when Hagar got pregnant.
Mhm.
They showed us how Sarah told Abraham, well, we'll tell after Isaac is born, that you've got to get rid of this other kid.
Yeah, yeah.
There can't be both of them here.
Mhm.
So we see the honesty and the emotion, and that God's plan isn't always or often exactly what we would choose for ourselves.
Absolutely. And when you add on to that, the fact that his plan isn't like ours, I also love that when we interject our own free will, that kind of like gives him a variable, right?
Mhm,
How
mhm,
he can step in that. Because if you look at Hagar and Ishmael, he mirrors what he does with Israel. Because he says, I'm going to give him 12 nations, right?
yep,
There's a mirror there, you know, where he's like, yeah, you kind of mess things up, but I'll clean up your mess a little bit,
mhm,
you know? And I love the picture that it paints that we can, that God's going to meet us where we make our human choices. You know, he doesn't expect perfection from us. And he never faults either Abram or Sarah for laughing.
no,
He never faults them for that. Right. I want to think that God recognizes that we have these issues as human beings, right? That we're going to struggle with the getting the finite into the infinite, or
mhm,
maybe it's seeing infinite in the finite. One of the two. I don't know which way
mhm,
you should look at that because we know that there are times where he did not take well to that. You know, like Zechariah would be a case of that, right? Like we know that there are times when that was not taken well, but here he's like, I'm telling you, people, like, and I think it also talks to that, to your point, our time isn't God's time,
yeah,
you know, and God just knew it wasn't time yet, you know, and then when he says it's going to be in a year, I can't fault Sarah. She'd heard
yeah,
24 years before that it was going to happen. He's like, oh, sure, why now, right?
mhm,
Well,
mhm,
did she know this was him arriving to say now is the time, right? That's what I want to think this visit was for. To say,
right,
I made you
right,
a promise, and now I've come back to fulfill it. This is the
right.
time. Yeah.
And Sarah perhaps had the bigger leap of faith to take. I don't mean just physically with the pregnancy, but things were done outside of her control.
All the time.
Like God spoke to
All the time.
Abram and said, "Go."
Yeah.
And Abram said, "Great." And Sarah has to go along.
Yep.
Um, and he just every step of the way. I mean, Abram says, "Pretend you're my sister."
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do whatever you say. She's in a position with no power. Now,
Mhm.
compared to a lot of other women, she has a little bit of power because she's wealthy,
Right.
but and her husband is a man of position and power.
Right.
But she has no control over what we think of as our life choices.
Mhm.
she just kinda has to make the best of everything, and in the process, I imagine she came to know who God was and came to know that she could trust God, but she isn't here yet.
Mhm. And I can't blame her.
Uh-uh.
I cannot blame her at all. Right. And there are times when she refers to Abram as her Lord too. Like,
Right. That was just a term. It was a term that doesn't necessarily mean God.
no, no, no. But it was a term of respect for someone you saw as an
Uh-huh.
authority over you.
Uh-huh.
So she didn't have a 21st century marriage where you were equals.
No.
She recognized her place versus his.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And you've got these three visitors who are obviously important. You know, if this was happening today, I would want Kelly right there with me. Right.
Right. Right.
That's not the case here. The case here is she's listening in, eavesdropping from the door of
Right.
the den, you know,
Right.
but that's the most she can do. You know, she can't go out and greet them. She has no exposure. And so, how is she supposed to have that trust that you're talking about when the culture of the day kept her away from it all?
Mhm.
He was the
Mhm.
one who got the benefit of having the conversations. Yeah.
And if we take that to our time now,
Mhm.
it reminds us that there are still a lot of people who don't have agency over their own lives.
Sure.
And even though this part isn't actually in this story, but it also lets us know that they're important in God's plan. Like
Mhm.
Sarah didn't have agency, but the plan wouldn't have worked without her.
Right.
And so, even in God's plan for the world today, we have to be careful to respect the people who don't have agency over their own life because God is working through them. We might not recognize it, but God is working through them and on their behalf because we know that God has a special preference for the poor and the powerless.
Mhm. Right. Because and they need it because if he's not gonna speak up for them, who will? Right?
Mhm.
I'm like,
Mhm.
that's the whole, concept there. It's like, and that's why we're charged to be that voice and those hands and those feet, because somebody
Mhm.
needs to be. So talk to me a little bit about your thought on God's opinion on us having doubt in his plan.
Oh, I think God, for the most part, expects us to have doubt. I
Okay.
mean, perhaps Zechariah, he didn't expect to have doubt because Zechariah was a priest from a
Oh,
long line of
sure.
priests.
Sure.
So
Long.
he should have known that God works in unusual ways, and God spoke to him in the Holy of Holies, for Pete's sake.
Great.
But I think that God expects us to have doubts because God knows how limited we are,
Right.
you know, especially since Jesus returned to heaven with firsthand experience of
Mhm.
how limited humans are.
Yeah.
Um, how could we not doubt when things are just beyond our comprehension? And God also knows that we have self-interest. Our
Hmm.
self-interest is very important to us. And if you're telling me that I'm gonna do something through you that is against your self-interest, it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, I don't think so. And
Yeah.
why would you wanna do that?
Well,
So
yeah.
I really think that God expects those doubts and plans for them,
Okay.
and sometimes changes the plan to
Yeah.
accommodate our doubts.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take that one step further. So you said that you think that God's okay with us doubting, which we have plenty of experience
Mhm.
all throughout the Bible of that, right? My question to you is, do you think he expects it?
I do,
Okay. Why is that?
because God knows us,
Fair.
and especially since Jesus,
Okay.
there's more firsthand experience of us,
Okay.
and just everybody almost everybody that God has chosen has doubted at some point, so why would we stop now?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because even Peter doubted. Let's be honest. We might not use those
Mhm.
words, but he did.
Yep.
Right. He absolutely did.
Uh-huh.
So, okay. So I'm going to give you your gotcha question of the week. Are you ready?
I guess so.
This one's easy though. So, all right. So if Sarah was here recording this podcast with us, okay, what do you think she would want to clarify for the church today when it comes to the concept of the way that your years age you in a way that birth dates don't, and the way you see the world?
Oh my goodness. That's an excellent question. I wish I had an answer. Um,
That's why it's your
I
grandmother.
think that yeah, I know, I know. Um, I'm sure that Isaac did keep her young,
Mhm.
um, but that her jealousy and her some of the stuff that came before, she was she was really acting old until Isaac came along,
Right.
and I'm sure that Isaac and learning that God does keep promises,
Mhm.
um, probably restored some youth to her,
Okay.
and I sure hope she had a nanny to chase at 91 years old to chase that baby around.
Well, we know it wasn't Hagar.
Right?
We know that.
Safe bet.
Yeah. So I will say that I was watching an interview with Jimmy Carr, who is a British comedian, not a Christian, by the way. Um, that's a whole nother side conversation. But he made an interesting comment about how he had children very late in life and that he realized that once he had children, that he now had skin in the game. That life was easy and you could make all the risky decisions you wanted because what was at risk, right? But then when you had children, it changed everything in the way he
Mhm.
and it made me think of Abraham and Sarah. I'm like, did they make all the risky decisions they made because they didn't have any skin in the game? So it's so
Could be, could be.
mhm,
But you have to wonder how long at what age of the children did they pass? But I guess we do know that Ishmael and Isaac came together to bury Abraham, so I
mhm,
guess they did.
mhm,
Abraham and Sarah lived long enough to see them grow up, but
yeah. Well, and for Ishmael to come back, so there was obviously some relation there because they were able to get a hold of Ishmael.
mhm,
So they're really interesting.
right.
That's all those pieces that I mean, the Bible's only so big. You can't have every detail, right? But it's one of
No.
the details that would be really interesting to figure out how that worked out years down the line. So
Well, there must have stayed connections because didn't Esau marry one of Ishmael's daughters?
I think so. I think so. Yeah. So, but the world was a smaller place, so probability was higher.
It was, it was.
So, all right, Karen. Well, thank you for joining me for yet another week, and we'll see you next week where we go over yet another woman of the Bible.